Hello and welcome to Scholars in a Bar. As you might can tell, we are not in a bar today, and that's because the COVID-19 epidemic has swept across the United States, and bars, well, they're just not open so much anymore. So instead of just throwing away the idea, which was to get together with various scholars and talk about ideas of the liberal arts, ideas that have influenced Western civilization, religion, culture, we decided we would do another forum and meet in people's houses or otherwise have the conversations we'd planned to have. And the idea is that we would always have a drink. So this is casual conversations around a drink. And joining me today is Dr. Alan Eichelman. Hi, Al.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
All right, what are we drinking today?
We are drinking a little 20-year-old single malt scotch that has been aged in sherry cask. It's a very nice scotch.
It is a very nice scotch. Today, we're going to start talking about issues that have affected Western culture, Western religion, and you're particularly a good person to talk to about this. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I've got a bachelor's in history of ideas and intellectual history from Northern Illinois University with a minor in philosophy. My Master of Divinity is from Bethany Theological Seminary. I have a Master of Arts in Social Science with a concentration in Urban Studies from the University of Chicago. A Master of Science in Administration and Organizational Behavior from George Williams College. And my doctorate degree is from McCormick Theological Seminary, which is an affiliate institution of the University of Chicago on the University of Chicago campus.
Okay, but before people start thinking you're strictly an egghead ivory tower academic, you spent many years in the practical work of ministry.
Oh, yeah, I spent... Correct, I did. Probably over 25, 26 years before I switched to academia. And in that time, I also did a lot in terms of not-for-profit institutions, the development of various not-for-profit institutions and programs. So I've got quite a varied experience in addition, professional experience in addition to the academic experience.
Okay, so let me ask you this before we start talking about this. Some people, particularly people who have a deep religious faith, but have not ever studied the history of religion or the ideas that led up to what we see in the Bible. They're a little scared of this. They think it might diminish their faith. What's your thought on that?
It can, how can I say, it can have a sobering effect on one's faith. And I remember in seminary when some of the ideas that we were being taught ran counter to what the students, or many of the students, had learned, say, in their Sunday schools. It rattled them a bit. But once they really got into it, it actually had the effect of strengthening their faith. And the reason for that is they came to appreciate the depths of faith, the depths of the religious experience. They came to view the scriptures, for instance, in a more in-depth way. Once they got away from a kind of just basic literalism, they were able to do some analysis of the scriptures that helped them to really open the scriptures up to them to see some of the deep and resonant themes in the scriptural material. So what I would say is don't be afraid. If you've had a profound religious experience, because it all begins with that as far as I'm concerned, with the basic religious experience. If you've had a profound religious experience, nothing's really going to shake that or dissuade that. It might alter your perspective, but it's not going to impact your experience, because your experience belongs to you. It's what it is. Nobody can claim that it's bogus, or people try, but as far as I'm concerned, nobody's lived inside of your skin except you. So I respect your experience. I think your experience is authentic, or can be authentic. Sometimes it can be a little dangerous if it's shaped by certain factors. But most religious experience is not. Most religious experience is healthy. It's practical. It's workable. It leads people to live more meaningful lives and more productive lives.
Well, Al, I grew up in a very conservative religious background. Now, the particular church I went to wasn't as conservative as others, but the general environment was conservative. And one of the ideas people believed and still believe is that there is one God that is never changing, always the same, and that message is the same from Genesis to Revelation. But when I first finished reading the Bible for the first time end to end, when I was about 14, it didn't read that way to me. What's your opinion on that?
No, I can understand why it wouldn't read that way to you. For instance, because look, there's so many different stories, and some of the stories don't line up very well. Just right from the get-go, if you read the two creation stories in Genesis, and a lot of people don't realize that there's two, there's not just one. There are two that have been skillfully spliced together. The first creation story is the 7-day creation account, which goes from Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 2:4. And then it picks up another creation story, which is the creation of Adam. We say Adam. Adam is literally the Hebrew word for humankind.
And it comes from a word meaning clay.
Yeah, it means clay, because it's Adamah is the term that means clay. So a humankind, Adam, comes out of Adamah, which is the clay of the ground, which of course is stardust. The old, we are all created from stardust.
Yeah, you're going into Carl Sagan.
Yeah, going into Carl Sagan's idea. I mean, the Bible picked it up long before Carl Sagan. And Ishato actually means mother of all. So these are really symbolic images. And the ordering of creation in the first 7-day account and the second account with Adam and Ishato are quite different. Mm-hmm. The ordering of the creation event itself is quite different. And it's really hard. I mean, I've heard scholars try to reconcile that somehow, and I think they fall really short. They're presuming a interpretive lens that has to be defended, so they become contortionist in trying to defend it.
Well, I think we could talk for hours, and we probably will over the course of time, about these different changes. But today I want to kind of ask you about one of the things that strikes me, because I've been reading a good bit lately about Bronze Age history, early Iron Age history, which overlaps the biblical story very well. And one of the things that's key in the Bible is the Babylonian captivity, the invasion of, and you can see this in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezra. It's a big deal.
It's a biggie.
So tell me about that, how it happened and what that began to do to the Jewish faith, and then how that would later affect us in Christianity.
Okay. We're not sure exactly, but we've got a kind of idea based on the after effect of the Jewish experience in Babylon, then Persia. And I say Babylon and then Persia because it's really a two-phase thing. The Babylonian captivity occurs when the kingdom of Judah is destroyed by Babylon in the year 587 BCE. Mm-hmm. At that point, the leaders of the kingdom of Judah, which is centered around Jerusalem, which is the only part of the larger expanse of Israel that is left. The 10 tribes that were Israel have already been dissipated.
Right.
They're already gone.
The Assyrians
have taken
that's
where you
them
get
out
the idea. The Assyrians took them out. So that's where you get the idea of the 10 lost tribes. So now you've got the one tribe holding on to the tradition, which is Judah. from which you get the name Jews, by the way. And so the Judeans end up, or the leadership group ends up in exile in Babylon. The idea, of course, is to isolate the leaders so that you can control the colony. And they don't fare too well.
So they didn't take everybody. They just took the leaders.
leadership group.
Okay.
And so what happens in the year 537 BCE, some 50 years later, the Persians under Cyrus conquer Babylon.
Okay.
So now the Babylonian Empire is the Persian Empire, and the Persians are the one who control now the fate of the Jews. The Persians had a totally different policy relative to their colonies. As far as they were concerned, people could go back, could establish their, in this case, they could go back to Jerusalem, reestablish the temple. They could have all of their culture and the self-governance of their culture that they wanted. This wasn't just true for the Jews, and at this point, this was true for other colonized people as well. The only thing that the Persians required was that you pay tax, and when you're called up for military service, you go and serve.
Okay, but let me ask you a little something else here. That the idea of Jewish monotheism.
Yeah.
There are certainly writings that are monotheistic in the Bible prior to us getting to this period. Although some scholars tend to think that some of that might be retrojection.
Yeah. Correct.
But the idea, and see, one of the ideas I've heard tossed around recently, and see if you agree or disagree with this, is that the idea that Cyrus, who was a heathen, a pagan, would come in and wipe out the Babylonians and allow the people of Judea to go back to Jerusalem, was evidence that the God of Israel was working through this pagan.
Correct.
And that came to the idea, well, if our God can control this pagan, our God is the one God. You buy that or not?
Yeah, what really happened, a lot of people would say, or a lot of scholars would say, that what you really had in Israel prior to this time was not true monotheism, but something called henotheism. In other words, we only worship one God. We recognize those other gods are out there as being valid. They're insignificant. They're not very powerful or strong. Our God is better. Our God can beat up your God, kind of thing. But it's the only God. He's the only God for us. And when I'm teaching it in class, the way I put it to my students is, it's like the guy who looks his girlfriend in the eye and say, "You're the only girl in the world." Now, he doesn't mean that literally, but what he's really saying is, you are the only girl for me. So Yahweh, the God of Israel, God of Judah, was the only God for them. What happens when they are in exile, a realization comes upon them. Our God is not tied to this place, not tied to Israel, not tied to Judah. We can worship our God in a foreign land. There's a marvelous psalm that sings, as we linger in Babylon, how do we worship our God in a foreign land? They come
by
to
the rivers of Babylon.
By the rivers
we
of
sat
Babylon.
down, yes.
And they come to the realization that, yes, they can. And why? Because there really is only one God. And if you think there's more than one God, period, you got it wrong. We got it right. We don't expect you all to become Jews, but we do expect you to smarten up, wise up, and come to an understanding that there just is one God.
Now, this is kind of getting back to the Persian influences I want to talk about, is that this transition from a henotheistic viewpoint to a more monotheistic viewpoint, some people say was in part triggered by the influence of the priest of Judea to the priest of a religion called Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, if it wasn't triggered by it, it certainly was strengthened by it. And I think that's what most scholars would say. And Judaism itself takes a different kind of turn or direction after its brush with Zoroastrianism, which is the quintessential Persian religion, Zoroastrianism. So in order to understand how Zoroastrian impacts Judaism, you have to understand a little bit about Zoroastrianism.
Okay. So, was there a person, a prophet, who was responsible for creating the foundations of Zoroastrianism?
One is Zoroaster, and the other is Zarathustra.
This
So
is
it's
the 2001
Yeah.
Space Odyssey thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Thus spake Zarathustra.
Zarathustra, yeah. It's Zoroaster, aka Zarathustra. And we don't know exactly when he lived. I've heard anywhere from about 1200 BCE, which puts it in line with the Exodus, period of the Exodus, or later, but usually someplace around there. And the written material for Zoroastrianism, the Zend-Avesta, as far as we know, doesn't come about until you get into the 2nd or 3rd century CE. So it's later on, so that you actually have written documentation. But the belief is, and again, for the Zoroastrianisms, that the Zoroastrians is not that there's one God, but that there's two gods.
Okay, so it's not, are we monotheistic or are we dualistic?
That's the issue. And for Zoroastrianism, I think most would say they were dualistic, not truly monotheistic. And yet still having an impact upon Judaism and subsequently then upon Christianity and Islam.
So what's the differentiation here? Is there a war going on between these two different
Yeah,
gods?
there are. There's the good God who is Aramazda, and the bad God who is Ahriman, the Prince of Darkness, the author of evil in the world. And Aramazda is the God of goodness. God, he creates humankind, the earth and humankind, for the purpose of doing cosmic war with Ahriman.
Okay.
And the idea is that over 3,000 years, 3 millennia, Aramazda, through people, will defeat Ahriman.
And how through people?
Through their acts of goodness, kindness, decency. Eventually, what will happen is that will outweigh all the evil in the world.
So, if I'm getting this right, when acts of kindness, acts of benevolence, these are sort of records are sort of kept of that, and it helps tilt the scale one way or the other.
If you're online with Aramazda and you die, you go to heaven. If you're online with Ahriman and you die, you go to hell.
Okay.
So there is a heaven and a hell. However, it's only temporary. Heaven and hell are temporary states. They're not permanent states. Because every 1,000 years, every millennia, Zoroaster returns, being born of a virgin of his own seed, to bring in a new 100,000-year age, which at the end of the 3,000-year period culminates in the defeat of Ahriman and the general resurrection of everyone, including the evil. Why? Because where are the evil people going to be? There's no reign of evil anymore. There's no hell. Hell itself has been defeated. So there's a general resurrection that occurs at the end of that 3,000-year period.
So, Zoroaster
Yeah.
is not a god.
No.
He is a human being.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
And you just have the two gods, one good, one bad. And it's the duel, it's the fight.
So Zoroaster is born sort of in a reincarnated state with the memory of these things that he is to bring?
And the idea is that he is also then basically receives the one who receives the revelation, who continues to transmit the revelation throughout these 3,000-year periods, these three different epochs. So at the end time, which in Greek is the eschaton, everything's hunky dory.
Okay, so
Evil's been defeated. Good is now completely in charge. Everybody has been resurrected to really a paradisial state. It's interesting to note that the term paradise itself is taken from a Persian word which means a walled garden. Now, when Jesus says, "Today you will be with me in paradise," he's using a Persian term to describe that, referring to a walled garden. It reminds me of the musical Kismet. I don't know if you've ever seen the musical
no, I've not seen
Kismet,
Kismet.
but there's a scene where the prince is in the garden in Baghdad with his love, the love of his life, and he starts singing, "Take my hand, I'm a stranger in paradise."
Right.
There you have it, the walled garden.
Okay. In fact, that's interesting because I have read recently that when the Second Temple was rebuilt, when we get to the temple was rebuilt, forming the Second Temple, that a large portion of it was dedicated to a garden of this nature with trees and flowers and creating this idea. And so we're carrying this idea of paradise that you've just talked about literally into the architecture and landscaping of the Second Temple.
Well, you also have the notion of the Garden of Eden. So it's not just and the hanging gardens of Babylon. In other words, gardens in themselves, especially in this very arid kind of climate, were valued. They were looked upon as being, generative, as being lush and pleasant and generative, unlike the harsh conditions of the desert which surrounded everything. We're not as in tune to this living in the city of New Orleans because everything is overgrown here. Everything is always lush and overgrown, and you're fighting the vegetation back. You're not not delighting in it as much. Well, you do delight in it, but you still have to prune it and keep it in check.
So what would you say? I can think of three things that pop into my head about the ways that the Zoroastrianism idea may have affected the development of Judaism, but what would you say, without me trying to bias you here, are the major things that
What I can
took
talk
away
about,
from
I
it?
think what I can talk about are what the major scholars that I've read talk about. One is the idea of an eschaton, of an end point,
an end of the age.
an end of the age, which you're going to find now in Judaism. You're going to find it in Jewish apocalyptic.
Now we're not. Now I want to start. We're not talking about an end to the physical world, right? We're not talking about the earth being absorbed by the sun.
No. We're
Okay.
talking about the culmination of all things in the age of righteousness on earth, with a general resurrection of the dead that occurs, well, as it says, Paul says, when the trumpet sounds. But you're also going to find it in Judaism. You're going to find it then in Islam, in Christianity, and in Islam. So that if impacts the entire Abrahamic tradition. That idea, okay, is definitely there. Another thing, and it's hard to say how much this impacts, but one of the things I've taken note of is that when you have a revelatory figure of some sort, the revelation tends to be on a high mountain somewhere, where you get the old idea of having a peak experience, okay? I mean, it's in the vernacular. And it was said that Zoroaster received his revelation on a high mountain. Moses received his revelation on a high mountain through a bush that burned but would not be consumed.
Well, Zeus lived on Olympus.
Jesus goes up to a high mountain where he is transfigured. And Muhammad received his revelation on the highest mountain overlooking Mecca. So it's all there. If you're going to be authentic, you're going to get your revelation on a high mountain. It's part of the sign that this person has credentials. They're bona fide. they have good bona fides, as they say, you know.
Well, that's great. What I'd like to do is just sort of wrap up here because you've opened the door for several other topics to talk about. But I think our point of conclusion thus far is that, well, you tell me what you think our points of conclusion have been from this.
Well, I think the biggest point of conclusion is this, that when you start talking about religion, and not just the Abrahamic tradition, but any religion, there are multiple influences historically and socioculturally that impact the development of that religion. We've talked previously about how economic technology shifts religious viewpoint globally. So, I mean, these are the sorts of things that impact the development of religion. Religion is never the same throughout all time. A single religion is never the same throughout all time. It's constantly evolving and developing, you know. Most people, when they talk about, I just want that old-time religion. Well, their old-time viewpoint goes back, at the earliest to the 19th century. Because what they're talking about is not the Christianity of the first century, that's for darn sure. Because the Christian, as I tell my students, nobody is a first century Christian. I haven't run into any.
Right.
They don't exist. You'd have to go back to the first century to become one. They're not going to exist again because we're not living in the first century. We're living in the 21st century.